At the twilight of the biplane era, when monoplanes were rapidly claiming the skies with their superior speed and aerodynamics, the Gloster Gladiator emerged as the last gasp of a design philosophy that had defined military aviation for 2 decades. Developed during the interwar period, the Gladiator was conceived not as an innovation, but as a refined culmination of everything that had been learned about biplane fighter construction up to that point. The Royal Air Force, cautious and fully embracing the monoplane revolution, sought a stopgap that could keep its squadrons competitive while more advanced aircraft remained in development. This necessity gave birth to the Gladiator project in the early 1930s. The conceptual roots of the Gladiator can be traced to the Gloster Gauntlet, a capable but increasingly outclassed RAF fighter. Gloster Aircraft Company, under the guidance of chief designer Henry Folland, was tasked with designing a successor that could extend the usefulness of biplane technology without significantly compromising on speed or firepower. Folland's vision for the Gladiator centered on aerodynamic streamlining, enclosed cockpits, and enhanced armament, all intended to bring the biplane format closer to parity with the emerging monoplane fighters being developed elsewhere in Europe. From its inception, the Gladiator was an attempt to squeeze the last ounces of relevance out of a fading design paradigm. The airframe, constructed with a metal fuselage and fabric-covered control surfaces, represented a hybrid of traditional and modern engineering. The twin-bay wing arrangement provided excellent maneuverability and lift, which remained desirable traits in dogfighting, particularly in colonial and expeditionary theaters, where slower enemy aircraft were still common. Designers sought to extract as much speed from the airframe as possible by introducing features like a town-end ring, cowling, and retractable undercarriage doors, pushing the airframe's performance to the threshold of what a biplane could offer. British military planners were not under any illusions about the Gladiator's long-term viability in a modern air war. But in 1934, with limited budgetary options and the shadow of German rearmament darkening the continent, a quick and cost-effective solution was politically attractive. The Air Ministry specification F-730, which originally called for a 4-gun day and night fighter with high performance, was rewritten to accommodate what Gloster could realistically deliver. The result was the first prototype Gladiator, completed in 1934 and bearing a clear lineage to its Gauntlet predecessor, but with marked improvements. By the time it entered service, the Gladiator was already somewhat anachronistic, yet its readiness and reliability ensured its place in the RAF's tactical plan. It was seen as a transitional aircraft, one that could be fielded immediately while the Hurricane and Spitfire advanced through their development stages. The RAF's conservative procurement policies, shaped by the painful austerity of the interwar years and the lingering trauma of World War I, favored such cautious steps. The Gladiator therefore became a bridge between the old and new worlds of aerial combat. The Gladiator's development process also reflected broader institutional hesitations within Britain's air establishment. While other countries, particularly Germany and the Soviet Union, were rapidly fielding all-metal monoplanes with enclosed cockpits and cutting-edge engines, Britain's reliance on established industrial relationships and existing manufacturing capacity slowed its own transition. Gloster, a relatively small firm, could not compete with the larger manufacturers like Supermarine or Hawker in terms of resources, but its agility and willingness to innovate within tight constraints made the Gladiator project a rare success story of strategic compromise. Ultimately, the Gladiator was not a revolutionary aircraft. It did not redefine air warfare or introduce technologies that would shape future generations. But what it did offer was a reliable, maneuverable, and reasonably fast fighter that could be deployed immediately with existing tools and training to defend Britain's global interests during a critical transitional moment. In a decade defined by rapid technological shifts and mounting geopolitical tensions, that reliability carried its own quiet value. The Gladiator's story begins not with triumph or innovation, but with adaptation, and with a deliberate choice to buy time in an era when time was rapidly running out. The initial prototype of the Gloster Gladiator, designated as the SS-37, first took to the air in September 1934. This prototype served not only as a proof of concept, but also as a platform to trial various engineering improvements that would distinguish the Gladiator from its predecessor, the Gauntlet. Despite its biplane configuration, the aircraft featured several progressive innovations. It had an enclosed cockpit, an increasingly standard feature in modern fighters, providing pilots with greater comfort and improved aerodynamics. The fixed undercarriage, although retained to simplify production and maintenance, was partially faired to reduce drag. The testing phase underscored both the promise and the limitations of the design. On the positive side, the Gladiator demonstrated exceptional maneuverability and responsiveness, qualities that made it attractive to pilots trained in earlier biplane models. Its Bristol Mercury radial engine provided sufficient power to push the aircraft to speeds exceeding 250 mph in ideal conditions, a respectable figure for a biplane of its time. However, the test flights also revealed structural vulnerabilities at higher speeds and a tendency toward engine overheating under sustained strain. These issues required design revisions, including modifications to the cowling and engine cooling systems, as well as minor adjustments to control surface harmonization. Throughout 1935 and into 1936, Gloster engineers and RAF evaluators worked closely to refine the design, gradually transitioning from experimental prototype to a finalized production standard. One notable improvement was the reconfiguration of the four 303-inch Browning machine guns, two placed in the fuselage and one in each lower wing, offering a level of concentrated firepower that was unprecedented in RAF biplanes. The decision to standardize on Browning guns rather than older Vickers or Lewis models signaled the RAF's move toward modernized armaments across its fighter fleet. Production approval came swiftly once testing confirmed that the aircraft could meet or exceed the adjusted performance benchmarks. The Air Ministry authorized the initial order under specification F-1435, leading to a production contract with Gloster for the first batch of operational Gladiators. The manufacturing process utilized existing infrastructure from the Gauntlet program, which minimized delays and costs. Gloster's ability to retool quickly, despite being a smaller firm, proved instrumental in getting the Gladiator into squadron hands ahead of schedule. As production ramped up in late 1936, a parallel effort was underway to train RAF personnel on the new fighter. While the Gladiator was similar in flight characteristics to its predecessor, the added engine power and retractable elements demanded greater skill and familiarity. Conversion programs were launched at several RAF stations, integrating hands-on instruction with simulated combat scenarios. Test pilots provided essential feedback during this phase, helping refine maintenance protocols and confirming the aircraft's reliability in extended use. By early 1937, the Gladiator had achieved operational readiness. The first units were assigned to No. 72 Squadron at Tangmere, where they replaced aging gauntlets in frontline service. Reports from the field were largely positive, with pilots praising the aircraft's agility, stable gun platform, and improved cockpit ergonomics. However, some voiced concerns about its comparative speed and climb rate when matched against newer foreign monoplane designs, such as the German Bf-109 or the Italian Fiat CR-42. The Gladiator's transition from prototype to production was emblematic of the broader strategic situation in Britain during the mid-1930s. With the shadow of war looming larger each year, there was little time to wait for perfection. The RAF needed an aircraft that could be mass-produced quickly, operated by existing squadrons with minimal retraining, and deployed across the empire where advanced threats were less likely. The Gladiator fit that bill, at least for the moment. As it moved into widespread service, the Gladiator began to embody the paradox at the heart of British air policy. A modernizing force still tethered to older platforms, caught between innovation and inertia. Its development and testing cycle, though efficient and successful within its scope, could not escape the reality that aviation had already entered a new epoch. Yet for all its anachronisms, the Gladiator remained a viable tool in the RAF's arsenal, a fact that would soon be tested in the crucible of global conflict. When the Gloster Gladiator officially entered RAF service in 1937, it did so at a time when the pace of aviation development was accelerating rapidly. Despite being a biplane, the Gladiator was the most advanced of its kind and was received with cautious optimism. Initial frontline deployment began with No. 72 Squadron, soon followed by additional squadrons including No. 3 and No. 54. The aircraft's handling characteristics made it an ideal platform for transitioning pilots who had trained on older biplane types like the Bulldog or Gauntlet, easing the introduction of more powerful fighter capabilities. The operational philosophy surrounding the Gladiator revolved around the expectation that it would serve as a stopgap measure until Britain's new generation of monoplane fighters, such as the Hawker Hurricane and Supermarine Spitfire, could be fielded in sufficient numbers. Still, the aircraft found itself at the forefront of British air defense, serving in both home and overseas commands. As early as 1938, Gladiators were dispatched to RAF bases in the Middle East, North Africa, and the Far East, where more advanced threats were considered less likely. These deployments allowed the aircraft to gain valuable experience in harsh and varied climates, revealing maintenance challenges associated with sand ingestion and tropical humidity. Combat readiness exercises and patrol flights dominated the early months of the Gladiator's service. Pilots praised its tight turning radius and steady gunnery platform, particularly in mock dogfights against earlier monoplane trainers. However, the limitations of the biplane structure, especially in speed, climb rate, and dive performance, became evident when Gladiators were pitted against more modern foreign aircraft during comparative evaluations. Nonetheless, its resilience, simplicity of maintenance, and forgiving flight characteristics earned it a strong following among line pilots. One of the earliest real combat experiences for the Gladiator came in 1937-1938 during the Abyssinia crisis, and later in the Palestine disturbances, where it was used for air policing missions and shows of force. Though these operations did not involve air-to-air combat, they helped solidify the aircraft's role in imperial duties and further expanded its operational footprint. By 1938, several Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm squadrons had also adopted a modified version of the Gladiator, designated the Sea Gladiator, featuring a strengthened airframe and arrestor hook for carrier operations. These aircraft were deployed aboard HMS Glorious and other carriers, giving the Royal Navy its first true carrier-based fighter. The Sea Gladiator would soon earn particular renown during the Siege of Malta, although that episode would come later. For now, the Gladiator was carving out a role as an expeditionary fighter. Its presence in outposts like Aden, Egypt, and Singapore reflected British strategic doctrine of forward defense, leveraging existing imperial infrastructure to project air power beyond Europe. In many of these theaters, the Gladiator remained competitive longer than expected, especially when opposed by similarly dated Italian or Japanese aircraft. Nevertheless, in Europe, the increasing threat posed by Germany's Luftwaffe forced a re-evaluation of the Gladiator's combat viability. Exercises with Hurricanes and Spitfires underscored just how rapidly the gap between biplane and monoplane technology had grown. The Gladiator could still turn tightly and absorb significant damage, but it lacked the sheer speed, ceiling, and armament of newer fighters. Its maximum speed of approximately 257 mph was simply not enough to compete with the likes of the Bf 109. Despite these limitations, the RAF continued to field Gladiators in secondary roles throughout 1939. They were used for convoy escort, air-based defense, and pilot training. The Air Ministry recognized their diminishing frontline value and began phasing them out of home defense squadrons in favor of Hurricanes. Yet, in the vast reaches of the Empire, the Gladiator remained in widespread use, seen as more than adequate to counter threats in regions where the Axis presence was minimal or undeveloped. The outbreak of World War II in September 1939 would accelerate the Gladiator's deployment into active combat zones. It became clear that even outdated aircraft would have to contribute to the war effort until replacements became available. By the time the first bombs fell in Western Europe, the Gladiator was already serving across 3 continents, operated by both RAF and Fleet Air Arm squadrons, as well as foreign air forces that had adopted it under export agreements. As an early wartime platform, the Gladiator would soon face its most challenging tests. Though eclipsed technologically, its robust construction, adaptability, and ease of operation gave it unexpected longevity on the battlefield. The transition from peacetime deterrent to combat-tested fighter was now complete, and the Gloster Gladiator was about to find itself written into the opening chapters of global war. The outbreak of World War II brought the Gloster Gladiator directly into combat, often in situations for which it was never fully intended. While the aircraft was already considered obsolete by the standards of 1939, its widespread availability and ease of deployment meant that it played a vital role during the initial stages of the conflict. It became one of the few British fighters to see combat in multiple theaters during the opening years of the war. From the frigid skies of Norway to the sun-scorched deserts of North Africa, The Gladiator's service was both extensive and unexpectedly critical. In Norway, the Gladiator saw one of its earliest major engagements during the German invasion in April 1940. Operating from makeshift airfields, RAF and Norwegian pilots flew Gladiators in desperate defense of key targets such as Trondheim and Narvik. Despite their inferiority to German Bf 109s and Ju 87 Stukas, Gladiators achieved modest successes by utilizing terrain cover, low-level ambush tactics, and their superior turning capabilities. However, they suffered heavy losses, especially when forced into open-air confrontations with better-armed Luftwaffe formations. This campaign underscored the aircraft's bravery-enhancing reputation. It could not match the enemy in speed or firepower, but skilled pilots could still exploit its maneuverability in tight dogfights. Another prominent chapter in the Gladiator's combat history unfolded in the skies over Malta. Perhaps the most mythologized use of the aircraft came during the early months of the island's siege, when a handful of sea gladiators, later famously known by the names Faith, Hope, and Charity, formed the entirety of Malta's fighter defense. Operated by hastily assembled RAF and Fleet air arm detachments, these aircraft provided a vital early shield against Italian air raids. Despite being heavily outnumbered and under constant threat, they bought precious time until more capable reinforcements like the Hurricane could arrive. While later analysis suggests that more than 3 aircraft were involved, the symbolic value of those named Gladiators endures, cementing their role in British wartime mythology. In the Middle East and East Africa, the Gladiator continued to serve longer than in other theaters, largely due to the outdated nature of enemy forces. During the British campaign against Italian East Africa in 1940-41, Gladiators fought against Fiat CR-32 and CR-42 biplanes in what were effectively evenly matched engagements. In this setting, the Gladiator's performance proved adequate, and British pilots managed to dominate many of the dogfights. The aircraft also supported ground operations, conducting reconnaissance, close air support, and convoy protection duties. Its simplicity and ruggedness made it well-suited to the primitive airstrips and sparse logistical infrastructure in the region. In North Africa, the story became more complex. Against early Italian aircraft, Gladiators managed to hold their own, but as German reinforcements and more advanced Italian fighters arrived, the limitations of the biplane platform became glaring. Still, British forces found roles for the Gladiator, including ground attack sorties and as a stopgap night fighter. Here, it served with both RAF squadrons and Commonwealth units, including those from South Africa and Australia. The aircraft was often deployed in mixed squadrons alongside Hurricanes, illustrating the transitional nature of this phase of air combat. Finland, too, used the Gladiator effectively during the Winter War of 1939-1940 and again during the Continuation War. Acquired from Britain and Sweden, Finnish Gladiators fought Soviet aircraft such as the Polikarpov, Bir-15, and I-16. Finnish pilots developed effective dogfighting tactics that maximized the Gladiator's turning performance and reliable guns. The aircraft enjoyed considerable success in this theater, where conditions of cold weather and rough fields highlighted its robust design. Some Finnish Gladiators remained in service into 1944, a testament to their endurance under adverse conditions. Despite mounting losses and technological disadvantages, the Gladiator maintained relevance in these disparate theaters by adapting to niche roles. As more advanced fighters entered widespread service, the Gladiator was reassigned to training duties, secondary patrols, and communications flights. Nevertheless, its wartime service was defined by improvisation and necessity. It was a relic of a bygone era pressed into modern combat by the sheer urgency of war. By mid-1941, most frontline units had transitioned away from the Gladiator, but in remote corners of the conflict, the aircraft soldiered on. Its presence in so many theaters reflected not only the British Empire's global reach, but also the logistical pressures of a world war. While it was never meant to face Messerschmitts and dive bombers, the Gloster Gladiator fought with distinction wherever it was sent, providing a vital, if often underappreciated, bridge between the biplane age and the dawn of modern air warfare. Beyond its active combat record, the Gloster Gladiator underwent a number of technical refinements and spawned several distinct variants that extended its operational life and widened its utility across multiple services. These variants were not merely superficial modifications, but rather efforts to tailor the aircraft for new roles as the demands of war shifted rapidly. By the late 1930s, as monoplane fighters began dominating the skies, engineers and planners recognized that the Gladiator's biplane configuration could no longer serve as the tip of the spear. Still, they saw opportunities to adapt the platform for secondary yet still critical functions. The initial production model, simply designated the Gladiator MKY, featured a Bristol Mercury 9 radial engine producing approximately 840 horsepower. It had 4.303-inch Browning machine guns, 2 mounted in the fuselage and 2 in the wings. This configuration gave it solid firepower for its class, especially considering its primary opponents at the time were often similarly armed biplanes or early monoplanes with limited speed advantages. The MKY was built with an enclosed cockpit, which was a progressive design choice for a biplane, and offered pilots improved protection and visibility, a departure from earlier open cockpit standards. Responding to naval aviation requirements, the Sea Gladiator variant was introduced as the Gladiator MK2. This model included key modifications for carrier operations, such as the addition of a strengthened airframe, arrestor hooks, and catapult points for launches from ships or converted merchant vessels. The Sea Gladiator retained the same engine but offered enhanced corrosion resistance due to the maritime environment. These aircraft served with the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm and, as mentioned earlier, saw critical use in the defense of Malta. Their deployment from aircraft carriers and catapult ships demonstrated the flexibility of the design in naval roles. Later versions included tropical modifications, particularly for operations in North Africa and the Middle East. These involved sand filters, desert camouflage, and sometimes enhanced cooling systems to cope with the harsh environment. Such adaptations allowed the Gladiator to operate from rudimentary airstrips with minimal maintenance support, a key advantage in fluid desert campaigns. In these regions, even by 1942, Gladiators continued flying in support roles, highlighting the effectiveness of these targeted upgrades. Internationally, the Gladiator was exported to a range of countries before and during the early years of the war. Belgium, Norway, Finland, Sweden, and China were among its operators. Each nation integrated the Gladiator into its unique military structure, often modifying or repurposing the aircraft according to local needs and existing infrastructure. Finland, for example, maintained its Gladiators far longer than most Allied nations, even introducing upgrades like ski-equipped landing gear for winter operations. Swedish models received different armament configurations tailored to their own ordnance standards. Though the platform was fundamentally limited by its biplane configuration, it nonetheless provided a valuable proving ground for certain systems and configurations. The hydraulic systems, armament layouts, and even cockpit ergonomics tested in the Gladiator informed later designs. Its relative simplicity made it an ideal training aircraft as well. By 1942, a significant number of surviving Gladiators were being used to prepare new pilots for advanced monoplanes. The forgiving flight characteristics and reliable structure offered a safe transition from basic trainers to high-performance warbirds like the Hurricane and Spitfire. One lesser-known variant was the Gladiator Night Fighter. Though not widespread, some aircraft were adapted with basic instrumentation and limited night-flying capabilities. These served primarily in a defensive role in the early years of the Blitz, filling gaps in RAF night defense systems while more suitable aircraft were still in production. Their slow speed and lack of radar made them ill-suited for intercept missions, but they occasionally managed to shadow or harass enemy bombers, particularly when coordinated with searchlight and anti-aircraft batteries. Throughout its service life, the Gladiator was the subject of ongoing experimental modifications. Some units tested new radio systems, alternative fuel mixtures, or improvised bomb racks for light strike roles. Although these innovations did not result in a radical transformation of the aircraft's capabilities, they underscored the continued relevance of the platform as a versatile testbed in an era of rapid technological change. In summary, the Gladiator's evolution was marked not by dramatic leaps in capability, but by a steady series of practical adjustments that extended its usefulness and adapted it to changing tactical needs. Each variant reflected the realities of global war, scarce resources, improvised logistics, and the urgent need to keep every available aircraft flying. While it never became a cutting-edge machine, the Gladiator's numerous configurations ensured that it remained a functional component of Allied air power during some of the most critical early phases of the conflict. Despite its obsolescence in the face of rapid aeronautical advancement, the Gloster Gladiator left a disproportionately large legacy, both as a symbol of courage during desperate defensive campaigns and as a case study in the transitional era between biplane and monoplane design. Its legacy was cemented not solely by its performance, but by the unique context in which it operated, its adaptability, and the pilots who pushed it to its limits. The most famous example of the Gladiator's cultural and historical impact was its role in the defense of Malta. The aircraft's stand against overwhelming Axis air power under the harshest of logistical and strategic conditions created a lasting narrative of resilience. The three aircraft, immortalized as faith, hope, and charity, became icons of defiance. Though records later clarified that more than 3 aircraft were actually involved in Malta's defense, and that these names were likely applied post facto for morale and propaganda purposes, the story endured. Today, the aircraft Faith is preserved in the National War Museum in Valletta, Malta, a physical relic of the siege and a national symbol of wartime perseverance. Beyond Malta, the Gladiator's service with numerous air forces made it a common denominator in early World War II air warfare across several continents. Its deployment by Norway during the German invasion of 1940, by Finland in the Winter War against the Soviet Union, and by China in the war against Japanese incursions demonstrates the aircraft's broad international footprint. In some of these theaters, particularly in Scandinavia and East Asia, the Gladiator was one of the few modern aircraft available to resist aggressive invasions, making its presence symbolically and tactically vital even as it was technically outclassed. The export success of the Gladiator also contributed to its historical imprint. Over 500 units were produced, with a substantial number sent abroad. Each foreign user had different experiences and modifications, leading to a range of operational doctrines and after-action assessments. Swedish airmen, for instance, regarded the aircraft as reliable and rugged, while Chinese pilots often flew it under extreme conditions with minimal support, highlighting its ability to operate from remote or poorly maintained airfields. The aircraft's adaptability to such varied climates and infrastructure levels ensured it could fill multiple roles even without modern upgrades. The retirement of the Gladiator came gradually, with most frontline units phased out by 1941-42 in favor of faster monoplanes like the Hawker Hurricane and Supermarine Spitfire. However, the aircraft found extended life in training, coastal patrol, and reserve squadrons. Even after its removal from primary combat roles, its influence lingered in the form of airframe lessons and operational experience passed on to newer designs. The Gladiator helped bridge generations of aviators who learned the fundamentals of dogfighting and aircraft handling in a forgiving yet capable platform. Today, only a handful of Gloster Gladiators survive, preserved in museums or maintained in flying condition by historical aviation organizations. In addition to the Maltese Faith, notable survivors exist in the United Kingdom and Belgium. These aircraft participate in air shows and educational exhibits, offering living testimony to an era when pilots in fabric-covered biplanes held the line against steel-clad invaders. The sight of a Gladiator in flight, its twin wings and distinctive radial engine growl, evokes an age of aviation that straddled 2 technological epochs. The Gladiator's legacy also resides in the historiographical realm. Military historians often cite it as the last biplane fighter of the Royal Air Force, marking the symbolic end of one era and the beginning of another. It represents a design philosophy rooted in maneuverability and structural simplicity, soon overtaken by speed, firepower, and streamlining. Yet, in hindsight, the Gladiator's effectiveness, particularly when employed tactically in favorable conditions, demonstrates that technology alone does not dictate victory. Training, doctrine, and sheer determination often played an equal role. While often overshadowed by more famous aircraft of the Second World War, the Gladiator remains a critical part of aviation heritage. It filled the gap when Britain and her allies had few alternatives, and in doing so, preserved air power continuity during a vulnerable transitional period. In the narrative of 20th century air combat, the Gloster Gladiator stands not as a failed relic, but as a testament to ingenuity under constraint and the enduring value of adaptability in warfare. Its contributions, modest in numbers but mighty in spirit, ensure its place among the aircraft that helped shape the course of the war's early years. Though the Gloster Gladiator's primary contributions are well documented in the theaters of Europe, North Africa, and the Mediterranean, its lesser-known deployments and operational curiosities reveal a broader and more complex service history. These overlooked chapters offer insight into the aircraft's adaptability, experimental potential, and the diverse operational philosophies of the air forces that employed it during a time of immense global upheaval. One of the more unusual uses of the Gladiator involved its role in meteorological and liaison duties in remote outposts of the British Empire. In locations where more modern aircraft were either unavailable or unsuitable due to maintenance or runway constraints, the Gladiator's ruggedness and short takeoff capabilities made it ideal for ferrying supplies, medical personnel, and dispatches. Pilots flying in the deserts of Iraq or along the rocky coastlines of Aden would often strip down weapon systems and armor plating to reduce weight and accommodate additional fuel or cargo. These adaptations rarely made it into official records, yet veterans frequently recalled the Gladiator as a versatile flying truck in areas where resources were stretched to the limit. Similarly, the aircraft's use in training programs proved vital during a period when demand for skilled fighter pilots surged. Gladiators phased out from frontline squadrons found new life in operational training units, OTUs, where they served as advanced trainers for transition to more modern monoplane types. Their docile handling characteristics and relatively simple systems offered an ideal platform for instructing pilots in gunnery, formation flying, and basic aerobatics. In many cases, pilots who would later fly Spitfires or Hurricanes began their advanced flight training in Gladiators, learning the fundamentals of energy management and air combat maneuvering. One area of interest to aviation historians is the experimental modification programs attempted on the Gladiator's airframe. While never intended to be a cutting-edge testbed, the airframe's robust construction made it suitable for evaluating minor innovations. In isolated cases, researchers tested propeller designs, rudimentary radar configurations, and alternative fuel mixtures using surplus Gladiator units. Some speculative sources suggest that early radio-controlled aircraft experiments were conducted using obsolete Gladiators as remotely piloted targets, although documentation is sparse. If accurate, these instances represent an early step toward the drone-based doctrines that would later shape Cold War and 21st century air strategies. The Gladiator also entered several civil registers post-war, converted for civilian use in air racing, crop dusting, and promotional flying. Though this phase of its life was brief and relatively undocumented, a few modified Gladiators reportedly flew into the 1950s in private hands. Their performance was no longer competitive with newer aircraft, but their aesthetic appeal and mechanical simplicity gave them an enduring niche appeal among flying enthusiasts and restorers. Internationally, some nations retained Gladiators well into the 1940s for second-line duties. For example, Portugal used them for coastal defense until more modern aircraft could be procured. In Egypt, a limited number of Gladiators remained operational in colonial air policing roles. These deployments rarely involved combat but underscored the aircraft's utility as a stopgap solution in regions where more capable platforms were inaccessible due to logistical or political constraints. Personal testimonies from pilots who flew the Gladiator in its final years often describe a unique emotional attachment to the aircraft. While few would claim it was the best fighter they ever flew, many praised its responsiveness, reliability, and forgiving nature in the cockpit. These characteristics allowed young and inexperienced aviators to develop confidence and skill before transitioning to faster and more demanding machines. Some Royal Air Force veterans recalled preferring Gladiators over early Hurricanes in certain flight regimes due to the better visibility and tighter turning radius afforded by the biplane layout. As aviation museums and historical societies continue to digitize archives and collect oral histories, new accounts occasionally emerge about forgotten Gladiator missions. These include isolated reconnaissance flights over Axis-held islands, emergency airlifts during colonial uprisings, or even clandestine courier missions in politically sensitive areas. While these stories often lack the grand strategic impact of major battles, they collectively enrich the aircraft's legacy as more than just a relic of the past, but as a dependable tool used creatively by those who flew it. In the final analysis, the unseen chapters of the Gloster Gladiator's career reinforce its identity as a transitional aircraft. one not merely bound to the past, but one that adapted, endured, and remained relevant in niches where newer designs could not yet tread. These forgotten missions, improvised roles, and experimental variants complete the picture of a fighter that, despite being technologically outdated by the war's outbreak, continued to contribute meaningfully in unexpected and often overlooked ways. The Gladiator's twilight years were not marked by obsolescence alone, but by quiet resilience, hidden utility, and a graceful exit from the center stage of military aviation. Gloster Gladiator's enduring appeal among aviation historians and enthusiasts is partly due to the small number of surviving airframes and the concerted restoration efforts made to preserve them. While the aircraft's operational career was largely over by the mid-1940s, its legacy persisted through post-war preservation, commemorative flights, and its representation in museums across the globe. These surviving aircraft not only serve as static displays, but, in a few rare cases, continue to take to the skies, offering a living connection to the final chapter of the biplane fighter era. Several original Gladiator airframes were salvaged from derelict or decommissioned storage during the 1950s and 1960s by private collectors and national aviation museums. Among the most notable is the example housed at the Royal Air Force Museum in Hendon, England, which remains one of the few fully restored and preserved Gladiators in pristine static condition. Its presence provides a tangible link to the pre-war British aviation industry and allows visitors to appreciate the scale, craftsmanship, and design elements typical of the interwar period. Perhaps more extraordinary are the flying examples restored to airworthiness by heritage flight organizations. The Shuttleworth collection in the United Kingdom maintains one of the very few Gladiators still capable of flight. Painstakingly rebuilt with authentic materials and in accordance with original specifications, this aircraft participates in vintage air shows and flypasts, demonstrating the maneuverability and character of a bygone aviation era. Witnessing the Gladiator in motion, its radial engine roaring, its silhouette cutting through the sky with a slow yet graceful pace, offers a direct sensory experience of a fighter once tasked with standing against Messerschmitts and Macchis. International efforts to honor the Gladiator's role also extend to Scandinavia, where the aircraft's history with the Finnish and Norwegian air forces is preserved through local exhibits and model reconstructions. In Malta, memorials to the aircraft's defenders, nicknamed Faith, Hope, and Charity, remain a powerful symbol of resistance during the early stages of the island's siege. Though only one of the original Maltese Gladiators survived, its legacy is maintained through replicas, museum tributes, and educational programs recounting their symbolic defense of the island. The Gladiator's legacy also continues in literature, film, and popular culture. Numerous memoirs and historical works reference the aircraft's service, particularly in campaigns where it served as the last line of defense. Though the biplane format may appear archaic to modern viewers, the Gladiator often symbolizes determination in the face of overwhelming odds, and its portrayal in documentaries and historical dramas has reinforced this image. Aviation historians frequently cite the Gladiator as a critical transition point in fighter development, embodying both the pinnacle of biplane design and the threshold of the monoplane era. In the design and engineering community, the Gladiator is often studied as a case study in transitional aviation. Its mixed construction, steel tubing, fabric skinning, and partial metal components illustrates the compromises and innovations of aircraft design during the 1930s. Engineering students and restoration specialists continue to analyze Gladiator blueprints for insights into vintage aircraft maintenance and aerodynamics. The lessons drawn from its simplicity, repairability, and field modifiability are particularly relevant in discussions around austere or expeditionary airframes. Beyond museums and air shows, the Gladiator also lives on through replicas and full-scale models. A small but dedicated community of aviation craftsmen and model builders reproduce the aircraft in exacting detail, often for historical film sets, reenactment societies, or academic displays. These projects, while niche, contribute to preserving the knowledge and cultural memory of the aircraft long after its physical components have faded from service. Perhaps most importantly, the Gloster Gladiator has become a symbol of resilience in an age of upheaval. While it never defined a war nor led a campaign, its service in distant corners of the world, often in isolation or under overwhelming odds, represents the understated contributions that fill the fabric of wartime history. Its survival into the jet age was not due to cutting-edge performance or overwhelming firepower, but rather its reliability, adaptability, and the dedication of those who flew and maintained it. In a century that witnessed aviation's rise from fragile biplanes to supersonic jets, the Gladiator remains a poignant reminder of where that journey passed through. It bridged the gap between two generations of aerial warfare, and in doing so, left behind not just a record of battles fought, but a cultural and technological legacy still studied, celebrated, and flown today. The last biplane fighter to face the modern world endures, not only as a relic, but as an icon of a vanished chapter in aviation history. Though the Gloster Gladiator was soon eclipsed in performance and capability by more modern fighters, its operational service offers a rare case study of adaptability in the face of rapid technological obsolescence. This biplane, conceived at the twilight of the biplane era, found itself thrown into some of the most diverse and unexpected theaters of war. From Arctic skies to desert sandstorms, the Gladiator functioned not merely as a relic of a previous generation, but as an active tool in the hands of military planners improvising against superior forces and limited resources. One of the most striking aspects of the Gladiator's combat record was the sheer geographical range of its deployment. In Europe, Gladiators served in the defense of Norway during the German invasion in 1940, operating from makeshift airfields and frozen lakes. In the Middle East, they took part in the Anglo-Iraqi War and the East African Campaign, supporting British and Commonwealth ground forces in largely undeveloped theaters where newer aircraft were unavailable or logistically impractical. Their rugged construction and ease of maintenance gave them an edge in remote operations, especially where supply chains were underdeveloped or vulnerable. In China, Gladiators were supplied to the Nationalist Air Force to combat Japanese aerial incursions during the Second Sino-Japanese War. While no match for the more advanced Mitsubishi A5M or Nakajima Ki-27 fighters, the Gladiator pilots nevertheless scored occasional successes through surprise, maneuverability, and superior training. These deployments underscored how the aircraft, even if not dominant, could be pressed into combat service far beyond its original expectations. The Gladiator also participated in limited naval operations. The Sea Gladiator variant, equipped with arrestor hooks and catapult gear, served aboard Royal Navy aircraft carriers and catapult-equipped merchant vessels. Though only a handful of Sea Gladiators were ever deployed at sea, their contribution during the early stages of the war, especially during convoy escort operations and in the Mediterranean theater, marked one of the final chapters of biplane fighter use at sea. By the time monoplane fighters like the Fulmar and Martlet became widespread, the Gladiator had already demonstrated the viability of naval fighter deployment even in modest numbers. A unique dimension of the Gladiator's late service came in training and second-line roles. As it was phased out from frontline squadrons, the aircraft found new utility in pilot instruction, gunnery practice, and familiarization flights for new recruits. Its docile handling characteristics and forgiving nature made it an ideal training platform during a period when the RAF was expanding at unprecedented speed. For thousands of pilots who would later fly Spitfires or Hurricanes, the Gladiator served as their first exposure to military aviation. Another overlooked but important use was its role in propaganda and morale. The story of the three gladiators, faith, hope, and charity, that defended Malta in 1940, while partially mythologized, became an enduring symbol of resistance. Even though more aircraft were involved than just those three, the narrative captured public imagination and served as a potent morale booster for civilians under siege. The image of antiquated biplanes dueling the Luftwaffe struck a chord in British wartime culture and was used in films, posters, and press coverage to rally support for the war effort. Throughout its diverse career, the Gladiator often found itself engaged in asymmetrical battles, whether against superior aircraft, better equipped forces, or challenging environmental conditions. Yet it repeatedly demonstrated an ability to deliver results disproportionate to its outdated specifications. In the absence of modern fighters, the Gladiator was not merely a stopgap, but often the only available tool, and it was used with remarkable effectiveness by those who knew its limitations and played to its strengths. Even late into the war, isolated examples of Gladiators remained in operation with smaller air forces or in colonial territories. In some cases, these aircraft flew into 1944 and even early 1945, far removed from the main theaters of conflict. Their continued use highlights the often ignored logistical challenges of global warfare, where not every front could be prioritized, and older equipment still had a role to play in secondary duties. What makes the Gloster Gladiator's history particularly compelling is not just the aircraft itself, but the way it was used creatively, repeatedly recontextualized in new roles and new wars. It is a testament to both the ingenuity of military planners and the resilience of the aircrews who flew it. The Gladiator was not the best fighter of its time, but it served longer, farther, and more flexibly than anyone expected when it first rolled out of the hangar in the mid-1930s. As the biplane era drew to a close, the Gladiator ensured that its legacy would not be confined to training manuals or museum displays. It became a living part of the global struggle of World War II, an aircraft defined not by innovation or speed, but by endurance, practicality, and the determination of those who flew it into history. The final chapter of the Gloster Gladiator's operational life unfolded not on the front lines of global battlefields, but within the quieter corridors of post-war aviation history. As hostilities drew to a close and technological progress rendered biplanes obsolete, the Gladiator's silhouette faded from military inventories, but its influence and legacy persisted, both in the preservation efforts of aviation historians and in the foundational lessons it left for subsequent aircraft design and doctrine. By 1945, the Gladiator had been formally retired from frontline service in all major air forces. In Britain, its remaining airframes were withdrawn to secondary roles or scrapped, while a few surviving examples found their way into instructional airframes for ground crews or training schools. In the Commonwealth and neutral countries, scattered Gladiators remained in limited service well into the late 1940s, often repurposed for liaison duties, weather flights, or as experimental testbeds in research establishments. Their mechanical simplicity and rugged airframes made them suitable for experimentation, including propeller and fuel efficiency testing, even in an age increasingly dominated by jet propulsion. In the post-war years, interest in the Gladiator shifted toward historical recognition and preservation. Several airframes were recovered from storage depots, training facilities, or even wreck sites and restored by aviation museums or private collectors. Today, airworthy examples of the Gladiator exist in a handful of collections, most notably at the Royal Air Force Museum and the Shuttleworth Collection in the UK. These aircraft, painstakingly restored to flying condition, continue to appear at air shows as vivid reminders of a bygone era in aviation, a time when wood and fabric construction met steel and fire in the skies of the Second World War. In academic circles, the Gladiator has become a reference point in studies of transitional aircraft design. Engineers and historians often examine the Gladiator as a bridge platform, one that incorporated many features of modern fighters, enclosed cockpits, variable pitch propellers, radio communications, while retaining outdated structural characteristics. This combination made it an ideal case study in the evolutionary process of fighter development. The design limitations it exposed also informed future decisions about airframe durability, pilot ergonomics, and logistical considerations for aircraft maintenance in combat zones. The Gladiator's combat service also left a lasting doctrinal impact. In campaigns where speed and firepower were not always decisive, the aircraft's survivability, flexibility, and ease of field operation offered valuable lessons. Military planners studying expeditionary air operations in resource-constrained environments continued to refer to Gladiator deployments in Norway, Malta, and East Africa as historical precedents for making the most of limited air power. These lessons contributed indirectly to Cold War-era doctrines about forward-deployed aircraft in remote regions, particularly for colonial policing or support to Allied states. Symbolically, the Gladiator became a representative of both resilience and obsolescence, two contrasting yet intertwined themes in military aviation. Its legend, particularly the tale of Malta's defenders, was institutionalized in public memory, reinforced through museum displays, wartime documentaries, and memorial plaques. It became a symbol not only of British resolve, but also of the broader reality that outdated equipment, if properly handled, could still play a pivotal role in the early years of total war. In fiction and popular media, the Gladiator has occasionally reappeared in war films, novels, and historical reconstructions, often portrayed in the role of the underdog fighter, a machine whose simplicity stood in defiance of superior foes. While not the centerpiece of wartime storytelling like the Spitfire or Bf-109, the Gladiator nonetheless earned a niche place in the collective memory of early World War II aviation. Ultimately, the Gloster Gladiator's story underscores the adaptability of military systems in periods of technological disruption. Born in the final days of biplane dominance, it saw active duty against monoplane adversaries and in global theaters where modern aircraft were unavailable. Its success was never about performance supremacy. It was about fitting into gaps, responding to emergencies, and fulfilling roles for which no better option existed. Today, when a Gladiator lifts off the runway during a museum flight demonstration, it carries with it not just the sounds of another era, but the echo of thousands of missions flown under difficult conditions. Its continued preservation is not merely an act of nostalgia, but a recognition of its role in shaping air warfare during one of history's most dynamic periods. As the last biplane fighter to face the modern world, the Gloster Gladiator remains a testament to ingenuity, endurance, and the enduring utility of even the most humble war machines.